Conditions may apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 27. Getting into the mood or swing of things. When Ivy touched down on the rooftop, Eraser was sitting on the ledge with a juice box, scratch that, nutrient packet, like he had been the first night they met here. In lieu of a greeting, he pulled another one out of his pocket and tossed it to them. Thanks, they replied as they tucked it into their own pocket. Eraser was right about them. They were good, and they were packed full of nutrients. It was like a full meal in a convenient, tasty little pouch. They were probably expensive, so they weren't going to turn down free food. After finishing his dinner, he flipped his legs around and stood up. I want to see where you are with your knife fighting skills. Like I said last time, your strategy would have been brutal yet viable if you were coming at me armed, so let me see what you got, he said, tossing them what they assumed was a blunted knife before adding, you can tap out at any time for any reason. Yeah, great. They didn't expect him to forget what happened last time, but they really hoped that he would. Whatever, they responded with an eye roll. They are blunted, so they can still hurt, so don't aim anywhere near the eyes and don't put too much force behind it. Got it? He added as they both got into position in the middle of the roof. Yeah, got it, they confirmed dryly. Same rules as last time. We're not actually trying to hurt each other, so pull your punches. Ready? Ivy simply nodded in response, gave Eraser less than a second to process the confirmation, then launched themselves forward, aiming a kick to his hand in an effort to disarm him. He evaded just like last time. Ivy was out of reach before he could even attempt a counter-strike. They danced around each other for a while. Ivy had, quote, slashed across Eraser's side once and his arm twice, and Ivy was sporting a, quote, stab wound on their shoulder and a slash to the ankle, but the fight was largely following the same route as their unarmed fight had. They needed to change it up if they wanted to actually win. Come on, use the environment. What can you do? Yes! The next time Ivy touched down, they grabbed a handful of gravel and tossed it into Eraser's face, forcing him to either shield his face and open himself up to another attack, or blind himself. Oh yeah, this was going to work. Okay, maybe Ivy was too confident in that plan because somehow they ended up with an arm behind their back and a knife to the jugular. Good tactic, but I've had that trick pulled on me too many times, and you telegraphed your movements too much, Eraser explained as he lowered the knife and let them go. With a grumble, they rolled out their shoulders and shot a glare in his direction. Quit complaining. You're doing well. Let's go again, he said, not entertaining their annoyance. They went for a few more rounds, but every single one ended the same. They'd be able to dance around him for a while, but eventually they would slip up and Eraser would take the point one way or another. They needed to figure something out. If the gravel trick didn't work the first time, it definitely wouldn't work the second time, so they needed to think of something else. But they were beyond frustrated at this point. They were already in a piss-poor mood, and repeatedly getting their ass handed to them wasn't helping. The third time they went to, quote, slash at his neck, they let their frustration get the better of them. That stupid scarf that he wasn't even using was shielding his most vulnerable area. Which, yeah, I guess that was the point, but it was pissing Ivy off. On the next pass, they grabbed a handful of it and pulled hard. Reflexively, Eraser brought his own knife up to cut himself free. Obviously, nothing happened because the blade was blunted, but that brief moment was enough for Ivy to slip their knife past Eraser's guard and stab him in the chest. Eraser just looked at them with a raised eyebrow and tapped their hand, prompting them to release the capture scarf. That would have killed me, you know, he said dryly. Oh, come on. They win the first spar in nearly a full hour, and that's his response? Their manic grin fell to exasperation. Semantics, Eraser. You've been kicking my ass for the better part of an hour. Let me have this. They quipped back. It's not going to be semantics, quote, once you're wanted for murder, Ivy. That's only if they find me out. You'd help me hide the body, wouldn't you, Eraser? They shot back. Eraserhead just looked back at them with their trademark tired expression. That wasn't denial, Ivy said in a fake sing-song cheery tone. They were exhausting themselves. They could understand the eye roll Eraser shot back at them instead of justifying that statement with their response. They were slipping up and letting their frustrations get the better of them. The mask was going to start failing them at this rate, and they almost couldn't be bothered to care. He was starting to say something, probably another critique or correction of form. It was definitely something they should be paying attention to, but being Ivy right now was just so dang exhausting. It felt like he had to force every witty retort up his own throat. He needed a moment to collect himself. He did say they were allowed to tap out at any time, for any reason. Maybe they should put that to the test. Walking away with little to no explanation seemed perfectly in character, right? Ivy put up a hand in the universal stop talking gesture, closed their eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them. Then they turned on their heel, walked off the edge of the roof, landed on the fire escape below, and sat down. He was in the middle of explaining all the things Ivy had done right and wrong in their last spar, like he had been doing for the last hour, when they looked like they were starting to zone out. He was about to stop to ask if they were even listening when they put a hand up to silence him, turned around, and walked off the ledge of the building. If it was anyone else, that would have been supremely concerning, but they both knew the fire escape was directly below where Ivy had walked off, and this wasn't even the first time they'd done that. He was pretty sure that he wasn't meant to follow, as he hadn't heard anything that Ivy would be running after, and when he peeked over the ledge, he could see them just sitting there with their head in their hands. That was unusual. But then again, when had Ivy ever done anything he could consider usual? Maybe they just needed a break. He decided he'd give them 10 minutes before he went and bothered them. Maybe they got triggered again and they just needed to gather themselves. He shouldn't interrupt. He went over to the other side of the building where he'd sat waiting earlier and took out his phone. Shota. You busy, Zashi? Hisashi. No, you okay? Are you supposed to be with Ivy right now? Shota. Yeah, I am. We were practicing armed fighting, and they finally won a match. Then, when I started talking about it, they zoned out, then put a hand out to shush me, turned around and walked away. Hisashi. Oh my gosh, they won a match? Wait, what do you mean walked away? Where are they now? Shota, just sitting on the fire escape. I figured I'd give him a second, but I don't know what happened. Hisashi. How'd the match go? What'd you say? Shota. Well, they won with what would have been a fatal shot, so I told them that would have killed me before I started talking about what they did right and wrong in the match, like I always do with students. Hisashi. Ha. Shota. What? Hisashi. You have been there for an hour now, and they finally won a match, and the first thing you say is that it would have killed me? Shota. Yes? Hisashi. Not great job, kid. There you go. You're getting it now. Or literally anything else? Shota. I've been telling them they're doing a good job this whole time. Hisashi. Were you saying it in that dismissive way you always do, or were you actually saying it? Shota. is that supposed to mean? Hizashi, you always say good job and then go into a whole spiel about what they did wrong. Shota, well, why the hell do I need to explain what they did right? They're the one that did it. Hizashi, flat face. I'm not saying that's what set them off, but I doubt it would hurt to spend more time going over what they did right, Sho. Maybe they're just having a bad day. He was fairly confident that they wouldn't want to hear over-the-top compliments, especially without prompting, but he could change how he responded in the future. Maybe they should move on to knife throwing when they come back. They were really excited about that last time, and they'd been sparring for a while anyway. It was getting monotonous. He was about to turn around and go check on them when he heard them climb back up onto the roof. They looked a little worse for wear, but it was nearly imperceptible. He wouldn't have noticed the hunch in their shoulders if he weren't looking for it. Let's move on to throwing knives. I assume you've practiced a bit since I last saw you? He asked. Their eyes didn't light up like the last time he'd mentioned it. He hoped they would, but he didn't really expect them to. They just shrugged their shoulders and gave an affirmative hum before pulling out the knives he'd given them and walking over to the target. He had brought a new piece of cardboard and drawn a better target, so he could more easily track their accuracy. The last one looked like Swiss cheese by the time he managed to drag Ivy away from it. They didn't spare him a glance before they started slinging their knives at the target. They were alternating between throwing overhand and underhand, and their accuracy didn't seem to be suffering from it. Interesting. He supposed that would make sense if they practiced both methods in equal measure. He let them go through their stash of knives before commenting, Your accuracy is already improved. Ivy, good job. Your form is great, and alternating techniques is a good call, but maybe try switching a little more randomly so you don't fall into a groove. Other than that, the only thing to do is more practice, he praised. Hopefully it didn't sound like he was putting it on too thick. He was being honest. The kid was doing remarkably well for a novice. All their shots hit the board, and most of them hit somewhere on the target. Ivy just gave another non-committal hum, collected their knives, and tried again. He knew that his act had fallen, and Eraser was looking at him with thinly veiled concern. He knew he should care, but he didn't. He was too wrapped up in his own mind. It felt like the part of him that usually cared was caged and thrashing around, violently trying to gain back control, but nothing it did was going to free itself from under the heavy weight of apathy trying to crush it. Usually whenever this happened, he would just hide himself away until the feeling passed. Usually, he didn't have to try to pretend that he was fine, and usually no one cared enough to even notice. He felt like he was under a microscope, and the part of him that would shy away from the attention was smothered too. The one emotion that didn't seem to have an issue shining through was anger, and it was bubbling higher and higher each time he missed his mark, and each time the knife he threw clattered to the ground without sticking into the wall. Luckily, throwing things was a good way to let out anger, so he didn't think he was about to let it get the better of him. Eraser had very little to say as he progressively shredded the new target to bits. He didn't take breaks to do anything besides collect the thrown knives until he threw one knife with more force than he had been, and he watched it sink into the target and stay right in the bullseye. He stood there in shock for a moment before turning to Eraser, only to find him looking back at them with a bemused and surprised smirk. Where the hell did that come from, Ivy? He asked incredulously. They were still in a state of shock, so they just shook their head and shrugged before letting out a surprised laugh. I don't know. Lucky shot, I guess, they responded. Eraser just let out a scoff that turned into a genuine chuckle as they both whipped their head back to the direction of the target when they heard the knife dislodge itself and clatter to the ground. Maybe not too lucky, they amended, and they couldn't help but laugh along. The comedic timing was just too perfect. Ivy seemed to be in a little bit of a better mood after they shared a laugh and got into the familiar patterns of patrol. They were still kind of quiet, and they kept their wisecracks to a minimum, but they were definitely less deep into whatever funk they'd been in, enough that he wasn't concerned that their mood was going to negatively impact their focus. It was a quiet night for the most part. They stopped some dumb kids who were about to unleash spray paint on a storefront. They walked a few people home, and they had to call an ambulance on a suspected OD. He had to show Ivy how to use Narcan and gave them a few doses to keep on them. It wasn't until 2:30 that they ran into anything violent because, of course, they couldn't have a calm patrol. He heard a gunshot ring out to the north, and when he looked over, Ivy's eyes were wide as saucers. He was going to ask if they were okay when they started toward where the noise had originated in a dead sprint. If not for his capture scarf, he wouldn't have been able to keep up. When they got on the scene, he had to hold Ivy by the scruff of the hoodie to keep them from just charging in. They sent a silent glare at him and batted his hand away, but stayed put once they realized no one appeared to be dead or dying. Kami, this kid had problems. They were simultaneously far too reckless, yet somehow discerning enough to not get themselves in over their head. It's like they lead with their head or their heart with no middle ground. In the alley below them, a man and a woman were cornering a third figure. From the looks of it, the woman was able to superheat whatever she touched because the third figure was stuck in a small circle of concrete with a moat of molten lava surrounding him. And the first man stood there pointing a gun because apparently the liquidized cement wasn't threatening enough. The man with the gun looked to have a weird fish mutation quirk of some sort. That was an interesting pair-up. But the victim had no visible quirk. If I take out Tasseled Wobbegong, can you swing down and get the victim out of there? Ivy asked, interrupting his analysis of the situation. Despite the dire situation, he couldn't help but look at them in confusion. Did they mean the fish guy? Tasseled Wobbegong? He asked. Yes, it's a fish. They look like a tasseled wobbegong. Now, can you do it or not? Ivy spat back like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Yeah, I can. What about Lava Woman? Cross that bridge when we get to it, they said, as they leapt off their vantage point, not giving him any time to argue. Yeah, okay. Tonight was Reckless Idiot Night, apparently. He shot his capture scarf over a nearby fire escape in preparation to swing down to grab the man trapped in a circle of magma. Guess they were both crossing that bridge when they got to it because he was not about to let Ivy stay down there alone a second longer than he needed to. The moment Ivy had the gunman's attention, he jumped down, erased the lava woman's quirk, and freed the man from the still smoldering ring of concrete. Unfortunately, he had to not so gently toss him to safety on the other side of the alley before he whirled around to erase the lava woman's quirk, just in time to save Ivy from a glob of molten something that they may or may not have had time to dodge, as they finally knocked out the weird-looking fish man and turned their attention to the woman. The woman, now defenseless between the two of them, surrendered, and he locked a set of quirk suppressant cuffs around her, and Ivy looped rope around the unconscious fish man. Ivy was too busy on his phone, likely sending a text to Tsukashi, to catch the pointed glare he shot in their direction for their recklessness, and as soon as the text went off, they scaled the alley wall, leaving them to deal with the victim and the police. Little shit. Once he'd cleared everything with the responding officers, he scaled up the same wall he'd seen Ivy scuttle up about 15 minutes prior. But when he got to the roof, they were not in sight. He called out to no response. Where the hell did they go? Eraser, where the hell are you? Ivy, I got bored. I'm 2 blocks north of you. Eraser, I thought we agreed you wouldn't go patrolling without me. Ivy, it's 2 blocks. I think I'll be okay. Eraser, stay put. I'm on my way. He sent back with a disapproving head shake. Yep, it was definitely a reckless idiot night. End of chapter.